Hey, Jonathan, can you hear me?
I can.
Awesome. Great. Welcome.
Hi,
Thank you.
Maren. Thank you.
Hey, Clara, you're there too. Great. Welcome. How are you guys doing on this Friday?
Well, it is beautiful. We are excited about, we might go apple pressing this weekend, which is essentially, I think it may be making like apple juice. So we're excited for some sunny weather and some apple juice.
That's amazing. Yeah. Did you guys get rain all day yesterday thanks to the tropical storm? Yeah.
We did, and it was actually kind of needed. All the gardens and flowers were all dry, so it was not a bad storm for us.
Yeah, that's good. We're down here in Raleigh. I was like kind of worried because it felt like the tropical storm came out of nowhere, and I like wasn't prepped for it. And then it ended up just being some rain, which my plants really appreciated. So I'm like,
Yes.
Good. Well, thankfully it was a one there where when you're caught with your pants down, it's okay.
yeah, exactly. And be better prepared for the next one. Awesome. Well, we will give people a few more minutes. Let's see, it's just 1:01. Yeah. So we'll let a few people trickle in, and then we'll start doing some introductions and get into it.
That sounds great.
Perfect.
Awesome. Yeah, it's funny. So I'm from Florida originally, and my husband's from New Hampshire. And so when we first started dating, we flew up there, and his family gave me like the whole New England experience of like apple picking and doing like apple cider donuts and all of that. And so going apple pressing sounds like the next level of that. And that sounds awesome. Having fresh apple juice would be amazing.
Yeah, I think so. It's kind of odd though, because seasonally, I think apples are usually a little later for our area. We're in West Virginia, but I don't know if these folks have a farm that has apples. I don't really know all of the stories. We're just going along for the ride.
Yeah, we're just winging it.
Yeah,
that's great. That's fun.
It's a good thing.
Awesome.
Yeah, so you grew up in Florida, but then you said North Carolina now though, huh?
Yes. Yeah. My husband and I joked we've been in Raleigh for, 8 years. We joked that I'm from Florida, he's from New Hampshire, and like Raleigh is like halfway in between both of them. So we joked it's our perfect in between.
Yeah, you guys are good at compromising. I like it.
Exactly. Well, I appreciate it because we have seasons here, whereas in like Florida, it's summer and Christmas, and I don't love the snow. And so we get a little bit of some ice storms here and there, but it's not obviously like New Hampshire where my husband's from. So this is like our perfect balance of weather.
Yeah, that's great.
Cool. Awesome. Well, I'll go ahead and get started. And as people trickle in, we'll loop them back in. My name is Maren Hayes. I'm a producer at Dash. And on this week's Mograph lunch, we have the team from Coat of Arms. We've got Clara Lehmann and Jonathan Lacocque. Welcome, guys.
Thank you, Maren.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, so do you guys want to give a quick introduction of kind of your background and of Coat of Arms and where you are? You said that you're in West Virginia, Helvetia, is that correct?
It is, yeah. I mean, maybe I'll go backwards. We're in Helvetia, West Virginia now. We've been here about 8 years. Before that, we were in Chicago and kind of ping-ponging between Illinois and West Virginia. But my background, I didn't go to school for film or design or anything like that. I did study like media studies, started like PAing and being a production assistant and working my way up on the production side out of college, and started a wedding videography company with my best friend just as a way to try and have some sort of income while continuing to learn. And slowly through like working my way up as a producer, started hiring myself as an editor and learning more on post, and slowly but surely Clara and I started kind of collaborating on the production and post side.
Yeah. Jonathan he failed to mention that he also studied psychology and religion, which that's what his majors were, which are super interesting. And I love that he came from a diverse background than the traditional route. So, and I did too. I studied sociology, anthropology. And I went to law school and dropped out after a semester because I hated it. I did make really good grades and was on track for, I think it's like I can't remember what they call it, the review or something where you write a lot. And I was like, I don't really like this. And so throughout with Jonathan and I are husband and wife, and we would consistently collaborate together on productions and things like that. I would come in as a PA or craft services or
talent.
I was talent on a few. And so I fell in love with the medium with him, and but we just didn't think we could survive. And so honestly, I was oftentimes the breadwinner. So I worked at nonprofits. I worked in hospital settings. I did a lot of like in other jobs that were just trying to make it through. And then slowly we realized, why are we doing this when we could just make our own company? And in 2010, we like really cinched in as far as expenses and tried to make ourselves as lean as possible. And then started Coat of Arms. I started first 6 months before he did. And then once he left, he was working for WGN out of Chicago. And so he left that about 6 months later.
Mhm.
And then we haven't looked back. We have been full-time with our studio and slowly hiring staff and working with freelancers all over the world and clients all over the world. So it's pretty nice.
That's amazing. Yeah, you said something, Clara, that's I think really important that people don't focus on enough in kind of like the early start of their careers, where it's almost more important to figure out what you don't want to be doing early on than like figuring out your end goal, like where you want to be for the rest of your life. So I think that's really interesting that like just because you get into something does not mean you're stuck in that you have the ability to pivot what you want to do. And so I think that's really brave too, that you're able to pivot that.
It was devastating when I quit law school, because I was on this track and I thought, oh my gosh, this is what I'm doing. I studied sociology, anthropology. I want to defend people and protect them. And then you realize you get into it and you're like, I've poured at least $22,000 into this. Should I stay and go, the full 120, or should I quit? And it is hard. And I think that there was depression there for a while, but I think the important thing is that I use so many of those skills that I learned in all the different jobs I had, and they are so practical now, and I would never change anything. So I kind of I'm very much a believer of, whatever you practice, it's going to come back and be useful down the road.
Absolutely. Yeah. And taking what you can from experiences like that and, putting that into the future work or wherever you want to be in your career. Yeah. That's just so important that I just don't think we talk enough about. And how would y'all describe your style, or even when you were first getting started, what was the kind of work that y'all were bringing in the most?
Well, let's see. I think at first we did like really oddly enough 3D renderings of medical equipment and like fans and things like that. And
there was like a mixture of these very technical 3D projects. And then honestly, I think the bread and butter of our early business was this interaction between production and motion graphics, where it's like, we're comping into live action and tracking and doing that sort of a thing. So, we did, I think our first big client was like Jaguar Land Rover, and it was for their PR side. So like, a new car would be coming out or some sort of update, and they would want to, show the car, but dress it up a little bit with, some graphics here and there. And so that was, I think, a lot of the work that we were doing.
And oftentimes the production would be given to us. But then sometimes we would be either going and filming or coordinating the production as well. So we had this, we wore multiple hats, and we literally learned all about animation design on the job. And it was slow, and it was probably a bit more arduous if we'd gotten an education, but it felt seamless and doable for what the style of learning for us. So.
I should say that I'm an editor, and so we had a post on that side, like editing, sound design, mixing, color correction, all that. But the design and animation, like Clara said, came as we were working. And like we mentioned before, we started in production. So it was like, we were getting these jobs where we were having to add elements that we weren't as familiar with. And that's where, partnering and collaborating with people who are far better than we are at design and animation was how we were able to build a portfolio that clients were interested in.
Well, and we fell in love with it because we're a little bit introverted. And so the idea of like being able to build an entire video out of your living room is pretty darn great. So
yeah, that makes total sense. Yeah, we live in a town of like, what is it? What was the census?
59 and
59 people.
Right.
So it's an hour to the hospital, to groceries, and we're surrounded by mountains and creeks and
yeah. So
forest.
Introversion is, definitely a part of us.
That's great. And so how do you end up landing a client like Jaguar in the mountains of West Virginia in a small town like that?
Yeah.
Well, to be completely honest, that client we first landed in Chicago. So
okay.
We will be fair in that we spent the first 3 years of our business in Chicago and grew a really nice list of collaborators, colleagues, friends, that we would be able to be like, hey, would you like us to work on this? Or, we have a studio now, we can do these things, and we're lean and capable of preparing something that's quality. So we actually were able to get that through a production friend who was filming on set with the Jaguar Land Rover folks. And he mentioned that we could do the post really well. And as you can imagine, like when you're filming Jaguar events, the turnaround's really fast. So
it was insane,
we had to be ready to go, and this just seemed to work well because we were young and we could stay up all night. And
yeah, it was like news, it's PR, so it's like if this isn't coming out the next morning, every hour this news cycle is moving on essentially.
But that's how we got Jaguar. And I would actually say that generally speaking, all of our clients, when we work direct, it ends up being, it's about friendships and having created a relationship with somebody who has carried us with them in their pocket kind of, and said, oh man, I know this team that I like working with. Will you consider them for this project?
I should say that because when Clara was working full-time as the breadwinner, I was able for 6 years to, while I created the wedding videography company with my friend, I was also freelancing on the side. And so over those 6 years and near the end of it, as a producer, I was kind of putting together lots of projects and connecting with directors and producers. And, that's where we were going and producing like music videos with the person that gave us connected us with Jaguar, and WebMD, like a DP that we had worked with or hired in the past, connected us to that director. And Google was an editor that we had hired on a music video shoot and had moved on and was full-time at Google. So it's like really, the relationships that you make and the people you connect with are super valuable,
Absolutely. And that's something that, you were kind of alluding to earlier about, going to getting the traditional experience of art school and like the practical learning, but then there's so much more after once you're out on the job. And something that's hard to learn in school is like how important those connections are. How do you feel like, or I should say, what advice would y'all have to someone who's just starting out and you don't have those connections or those relationships yet? Where is a good place to kind of start? Because it's a little overwhelming, you get out of school or you decide that you're going to go freelance and you don't have that network yet.
Yeah, I would say, have thick skin in the beginning and know that, like no matter who you reach out to, like people are busy, and I would not take any like lack of response if you're trying to email or go out for coffee or, learn through meeting somebody that, their response isn't necessarily a reason to stop. But I think with that, for me, like the way that I made connections was just reaching out to people and going on set. So I feel like no matter where you're starting, you connect with fellow artists, like whether that's students in school or people in the industry, we're so connected online now. I feel like you can go do personal and passion projects, learning and connecting with people.
Yeah, I also think that for some reason, when you create authentic work that speaks to who you are, it brings people to you naturally. And I'm not saying it's always going to happen, but when you put yourself out there and it's unique and interesting, it really does draw people. And I think that is a way to like, they feel connected to you, and then you get to talk, and then you're like, oh, I also like what you do here. And it's a nice way to create a bond. And then it demonstrates your capacity, you know, and your ability. And that's one thing we've always had a mission for our company is no matter what, even if we're doing, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of corporate client work, we need to make time and be intentional about making sure we still get to do either pro bono work or things that we're passionate about. And I think that has really made us happier for it.
Yeah. The one thing I'll add is like the sort of pay it forward principle, I think is a big one. Like early on, it's hard to pay it forward, but I do feel like if you're, let's say, a designer who's trying to learn how to do certain techniques and skills, collaborating with other designers, reaching out to studios and just building those relationships. And then as you get work, and let's say you can't take it, sharing that with others, like that's something that has, like we've gained so many relationships through people who are willing to do that. And so like as a principle for our business, we do that constantly with both other studios and freelancers, where it's like, hey, okay, you know, this budget doesn't make sense for you to hire us, like go to this individual, or we're busy, check out these 5 studios that we're friends with and really trust and like, you know.
Absolutely. And I think that's so interesting. And something we've talked about before is my background is I actually went to school for photography, so more on like the production side. And something that I've just noticed in the animation and motion and illustration design world is that it is so collaborative, and that surprises me in some ways because we're all technically competitors, right? But there's so much of that sense of community. And, you know, if we can't take on a project, we'll send their client, you know, a list of some people that might be able to help. We've made connections from other studios that have thrown us work. And so that community and that sense of collaboration, like, I just don't think I've seen that in any other space. And I think that's really beautiful and really interesting that it's just the way that it is.
Yeah, agreed. I think it's a good community, and I think it's one to mimic, and also just continue to be intentional about. All of us need to be aware of whom we are referring to, like make sure we're opening our community up to women and people of color and different, you know, perspectives. And I think that that's really special in this community. And I think we have come through the last 5 years, and I think we're speaking to what our climate is asking us. And I hope that we continue to test the boundaries and show that, be an example for others. It's a good thing.
Absolutely. Clara, you were mentioning about kind of making time for passion projects. I was looking around on the website and found the Born in a Ballroom trailer. Would you like to give the audience a little bit of some background on what that is?
Absolutely. Yeah. So Born in a Ballroom is a personal piece. It's a documentary film that Jonathan and I completed 2 years ago now, but it took us 5 years to make it. It's based on a promise I had made to my grandmother. So it's a very personal story. About 10 years ago, maybe 15 at this point, she had asked me to help her write her memoirs. And she had a fantastic, fabulous life of you know, traveling the world, but also being an entrepreneur. She opened her own restaurant called the Hutte here in the village we live in, called the Hutte. It's in Helvetia, and it's a little Swiss restaurant and very special to many that live here and to the state. And so when she passed away and we hadn't written her memoirs, I was devastated. And I thought, well, what can I do to honor this? It's important. And Jonathan was like, Clara, the Hutte is still here. We can still tell this story about your grandmother through the lens of the people that are, you know, have loved her and the restaurant itself. So it's a story of place, and it's touching, and I hope that you consider watching it. It's on Prime, and it's also, you can I think download it somewhere else too. Is it?
Yeah, it's like on Google Play, YouTube.
Yeah.
I mean, it's for rent all over, but if you have Prime, that tends to be the easiest to access it.
But yeah, it's for us personally, it is a way to capture something that our children and the next generations can covet for, getting to know her when she isn't here anymore. So, and then from a creative standpoint, it was a way for us to really test ourselves on long form. It's a 60-minute doc.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, so my daughter's name is Eleanor, and she is named after my grandmother, whose middle name was Eleanor. So I felt like a special connection to that. And my family's Swiss German, so I'm like, well, gotta come visit you guys now.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, Maren, it's written in the stars that you're going to have dinner at our table one day.
Oh my gosh, I can't wait. West Virginia is not that far from Raleigh, so I look forward to that. So you said 5 years. I mean, in addition to y'all having a business and having kids, how do you make time for a project like that, especially one that is long form?
That's why it took so long.
Yeah. I think that the first thing I'll say is we're patient, I think, with ourselves. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
Like you see,
you have to be.
I see it. I totally. And I see online all the time, whether it's like people tweeting or memes or whatever, this like idea of you can't do everything, like you can't be the person that cooks healthy meals, exercises, takes care of your kids, and so on. And that's so true. So I will say we tend to prioritize, very carefully, our family, our children, and then it's this constant balancing act between, work and play and other things that we may want to do. We're very intentional, really.
I also think that what we've done is say no to things that we are not like. Sometimes the big dollar is not going to be what you say yes to if you're really passionate about this personal story, let's say, that's going to give you so much more wealth. It's like not the same, it's not physical, it's not like the dollar, but it's a different kind of wealth. And we try really hard to figure that out, like, and balance that. And at the tail end of creating Born in a Ballroom, we hired our first employee, Ryan Butterworth, and then later, a little bit later, Grace Lawson. And I think that has been a huge boon to us as studio owners. And I think we were scared for a long time. And this is to all of you out there kind of thinking about this jump, or you have a small studio, but how do you pivot into something a little bit bigger? I was like so nervous to have full-time people. And I felt like, oh, I'm responsible for these people. I need to make sure their salaries are covered, that they can take care of themselves, that their families are taken care of. And so I was putting a lot of pressure on myself, but then in the end, it was actually even more helpful to me and Jonathan and our family. Mm-hmm. So, and they are our friends, they're our best friends. And I couldn't ask for a better situation in that sense. So like when you bring on either freelancers or a full-timer, there's that trust that's built. And I think that has allowed us to get more done. And it looks like we're superheroes, but really we just are surrounded by amazing people.
I'll reiterate two things. One is the power of no. I think that's huge, and really honing in on, like, this goes back to like existential psychology and stuff. For me, it's like the value is time, really, over everything. And so where do you put that time, and then the second is to not be afraid to fail. It's like the idea of, you're not going to learn, you're not going to see if you can succeed unless you're willing to accept failure to some degree. And that's a vulnerable place to be. And I can say for us, like, we are a little more conservative and risk averse at times. I mean, I feel like Clara is really that, like, she's the Swiss, I'm the Cuban that's like, oh man, let's just hire everybody and party, So it's like, it's worked out in a very, I think, balanced way that between the two of us, we found the middle path.
Yeah, I'm going to totally ramble on with that, because that's one other thing as far as finding that pairing of like somebody that is a little more conservative and somebody else that's a little more liberal on the like, the risk or the creative is so great. Like it is, especially if you have mutual respect, it's such a great dance. And then sometimes I can take on that role of being a little more like, hey, I really want to do this. I don't care what it costs, or Jonathan can be playing that like more traditional producer role. So it really is a great thing. And I would urge you to consider character as you build a studio.
Yeah, that's great. A question on that, what was the point that y'all realized, you needed to bring on help? Was it that you both were working, all hours and you didn't have that time, or was it a specific client project that you realized like this is going to bring in so much more work and our workload is just too much? Because I imagine for a lot of people, that decision point of when to hire and who the right role is really difficult. And I know it's different for everyone, but can you share a little bit about what that point was for y'all?
Yeah, I think that there's two angles that I look at that with. One is like the emotional in some ways, like there's the, this emotional IQ, right? Like a feeling like, man, like I could use help, or I want help. I'm feeling like there's a growth possibility, or I'm excited that we're getting work and I want to bring people in. And I think that's one voice to sort of listen to. And that's the more like liberal voice, but then the other one is maybe more technical and, like financial intelligence, let's say, like making sure that looking at your quarterlies or your yearlies, that you can project if you're to do similar or even a little worse than what you've done over the last couple of years, that you'd be able to cover a salary for, we're pretty conservative. So we're like, oh, we want to be able to cover somebody for a long time versus like a month or 3.
Yeah. My goal, and I'll just be transparent, was to be able to cover someone for a full year and have that in my bank account ready to go in case we failed and I had to take care of them. And I think that was smart, because in the end, what that allowed us to do was have still the freedom to do these pro bono or very creative projects that have no budget. And then, but have the confidence to maintain and not worry that like, oh, we're not busy today. Oh my gosh, we don't have that we didn't land that project, darn it, and that happens. That's going to happen. You may get released from jobs because the job is not what they wanted in the end. The client's like, I changed my mind. That happens, so you have to be able to roll with that. And I think that I needed that financial part first. And then second, and in tandem with that, what happened was in 2016, we started really landing a lot of direct client projects and became like inbound servicers or agencies of record for larger clients. And so what that in turn meant was we knew we were kind of predicting that we were going to get more of these bigger budget projects and be able to hold somebody. And so that helped. And then just experience. I mean, I think how old was the company when we hired Ryan? Was it 7 years old?
6 or 7 years old. Yeah.
Well,
and what's funny, I'll say this, outside, we've just hired another person, but the first 2 hires were totally them coming to us. So it's like, now it's, it's a little, there's been more coalescence than just them coming to us. It was like, like Ryan was somebody that we had freelanced with a lot and who we loved. And he was at a job and kind of came and was like, hey, I'm thinking of moving on, and not even asking. And we're like, well, wait a minute. We've been talking about bringing someone on. So can we make it work? And then Grace was somebody that we had known at another job. And then she was also kind of moving on and kind of approached us, and we were like, let's do this.
Yeah. Again, going back to that point of like reaching out to your buddies and being like, what you doing?
Well, I think to your point about, making sure we're inclusive, this is a good part of that too. Like making sure everybody has access to these types of situations is where I think the challenge is. As awesome as a community as we are, we do need to kind of keep that in the front of our minds, because it is work. And it is work,
and we have to be intentional, because I'm a white woman. My community is going to be it could be a certain community. And I'm aware of the fact that I want to be more open and intentionally strive to find those other communities. So.
Absolutely. So something you said about, advice to the audience is like, shoot your shot, because these people that got hired by Coat of Arms, they just asked. I think that's something, again, that people, you just gotta do a cold email, and you never know what's going to happen. On the other end of that, it could end up being a relationship that's clearly a good fit for both parties.
Yeah.
For sure.
And I feel like the joy of working with the freelance teams and employees is that they're there for the art, but they're there to be with you too. And that's pretty special. Like, you can tell when somebody doesn't have it in them to be doing something, right? We've all had other jobs where we just didn't really like it. And it's like, we're not giving 100%. But generally speaking, that's been, our experience has been like, this is why we do this. People get creative and wildly creative when they love what they do. And I like that.
Yeah. Pivoting a little bit to some of the work, is there a piece on your website or something that y'all get asked the most about? You know, clients always reference certain types of work. Is there one that kind of sticks out?
Well, I think over time that changes. So like early on, obviously, like I think some of the Jaguar Land Rover work, because it was a known client, would get mentioned in terms of mixing, production, post, and graphics. I think probably the number one thing is Lullaby Theories. You know, the series that we did is probably still the most referred to, like, oh, you know, we love this. And now, do they really want that or not is something that we usually find out in the process. You know, it's like some big brands like, oh man, we really love this episode of Lullaby Theories, but let's make sure it's this and this and this. And actually, you know what, never mind. Let's just do this thing.
I love that when that happens.
Right. Yeah, we want this, but it's not on our brand at all.
Exactly.
Right. And their references are completely wrong.
Yes.
Yeah.
But it has been I don't know, like a point of folks finding us and having interest in working with us. And, you know, there have been a few other things that have come up too, but I think that's the big one.
Me too. Yeah. Sometimes it's whatever's on the top of the portfolio page.
Yeah, that's true.
But
that's the one.
Yeah. But Lullaby Theories overall is the winner. Yeah.
And I will say that Google works with like everybody, you know, it's a huge, not everybody, I don't want to say that, but it's a big corporation that, my gosh, you know, works with many people. And I will say, like, if there's anyone ever wanting a product video, an explainer, it's like they tend to go to the big, you know, the Googles, the Amazons, the Microsofts. So if you have something like that, that even looks like one of those companies on your site, it will get referred to, I'm sure.
Yeah, that's funny. Going on to the Lullaby Theories, obviously they're beautiful and I love how they're produced, and then the added touch of having your children in the VO. I mean, we kind of started talking earlier before we hopped into Clubhouse about kind of the work-life balance or lack thereof, especially in this last year. And for you guys, you know, working together and having a family together, how do you, we were talking a little bit about, you know, you can't do it all. How do you, you know, maintain the sense that you have some kind of balance there? Or is there no balance and your kids do the VOs for your pieces and it ends up beautiful?
Well, yeah, I mean, we definitely fail on that balance all the time, as I'm sure all of you have too. And I think what we just have learned is that that's okay when we make the mistake, but let's try to get it back on track again. And we just are really communicative with each other and really try to know what triggers are usually causing that. And then again, the saying no to certain things. I mean, we're very, very involved in our community outside of not only raising children and having our own business. We volunteer a lot of our time on a weekly basis, even, to make sure that we honor the history of the community, but also help prop it up because it's Appalachia and it's hard here. It's one of the poorest states in the union. So we are intentional about our time there. And we just have to, sometimes we have to say no to something we really want to do, whether it's work or volunteering or something with the kids. We do prioritize our children, probably the top, because we realize that like that is fleeting. Yeah, it's not going to be forever. And Lullaby Theories was a celebration of their curiosity, and they're both little girls. They were 3 when we started those, and we really wanted to make sure that women and children explore science. So that really was what caused that one to come about. And it started off as a one-off. Like we were like, well, let's just explore what makes twins in a 1-minute video. And the theory of epigenetics. and identical twins specifically. And so it just happened to work out that after we did that one, people were in love. Like my family, one of my siblings listens to that video almost every night to fall asleep in college, because he had a little anxiety, and he was like, oh, I listened to that because I love hearing your voices. And it's just so touching. And I was like, well, we're not giving up on these. So we did 3 more, and that was the cap. We did 4, and it just was, it's unwieldy to continue because it never got picked up by a sponsor per se. We had a few aired in hospitals for free. We just gave them away for children's hospitals.
Yeah, that was the pain.
But yeah, it was just a nice way to capture a time when our children had that cute voice, and let them see and collaborate with our work. And honestly, I'm shocked at how well sometimes these girls can give notes. Like we'll show them, we were working on some videos that are animated, and they love, it's a TV series on Netflix that I don't, can we reveal it? No. Okay. So anyway, they are watching it and giving notes, and it's so darling. And I'm like, oh my gosh.
Well, it's actually good notes. You're like, man, you're actually right. That would be funnier. Or,
or like, oh, Lucy even noticed like, oh, the animation popped off there, Mom. And I was like, good on you, Lucy.
That's amazing. Oh, that's great.
I do want to say, like, they're not always working with us. That makes it sound like,
child labor.
Yeah, truly. And not to mention, like, yeah, we spend time with our kids by having them watch us work. That's definitely not the case. But I will say, yes, Lullaby Theories was a way to sort of combine some of our priorities and have fun. Just like with the volunteer work, we bring our kids with us and, try and expose them to some of these things that we do as both a teaching moment and a joy for us.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that because, and again, the past year has kind of shown us a lot, and the idea that, your work and your life are kind of smushed into the same space. People are working from home or home from work, and it's all together. And so instead of trying to like make that delineation, y'all like leaned into it. And, it doesn't mean that it has to be just about having kids, but any of your outside passions that are in your life category, you don't have to keep them perfectly separated from your work, and kind of leaning into moments of that to really experience or push something that you haven't tried. I really love that.
Yeah. And actually that's a good piece of advice. I'm not going to say parenting advice, but generally one of the things that I loved growing up was my community was very inclusive of all age ranges. So you weren't, it wasn't like you would go to a party and it's all for preschoolers, right? You would go and there would be a 90-year-old and then a 5-year-old, and it would be just as fun for the 90-year-old as it was for the 5-year-old or the 35-year-old, So I do think that the divisions that we create in society between like whom and who can be involved in something is a little silly. And so our kids get exposed to like our work sometimes, or our community functions and things like that. And I think that's a really positive thing and helps them mature in a way that is comfortable.
Yeah. Shout out to the small rural communities that force us to not only deal with ourselves, but to deal with all aspects of life together,
Right.
That's amazing. Yeah, my parents they're retired now, but they were both college professors. And so I essentially grew up on a college campus, which I didn't realize until later in life was, not what everyone else experienced. But like I went to preschool, right, around like college students, which, just opened my eyes to, I had a lot more experiences and traveled a ton with some students at like a really young age that I'm very grateful for. The only downside is I never realized that then college students would be younger than me eventually, like I was always looking up to them. And eventually I became older and I was like, oh wait, no, I didn't think this through. Yeah, but I love the idea of like different ages. I'm sure we've all seen those like news stories where retirement homes put like a daycare center, or like have the children, and both, like you said, both parties benefit from that, both the older generations and the younger ones.
Yeah, it's super important. And it's just very valuable to keep your circles open. I think that it just makes you more creative, and you're going to be able to put into your work these perspectives. That's really cool. And that's what Lullaby Theories does. It's kind of a mother-daughter, two daughters, you know, exploring something gently together.
That's awesome. Well, I am going to, let's see, we have 20 minutes left. I am going to, if anyone in the audience has any questions, we did get some questions on social media. If y'all in here have any questions for the Coat of Arms team, feel free to raise your hand and we'll bring you up. In the meantime, I'm gonna look through some of the questions we got on social. One of them was, do you select artists for hire based on style, or do you prefer a general or a broad style?
It's a good question. I think the difference in those tends to come between full-time versus freelance, for us at least. I mean, we're super small, we're 5 now. So usually when we're hiring a freelancer, it's more on the specialty side, or somebody who does design or illustrate in a specific style, or who animates with a certain technical ability. That's the quick answer.
And also, and so oftentimes a client, we joked about references not being accurate sometimes, but oftentimes they give you references, and sometimes the freelancer's work is referenced, you know, and they're like, oh, I really like so-and-so's work. And then we're like, well, we might be able to get them on this project, you know? So we try really hard to honor that. And I think that it based on sometimes the budget, you might have to be more of a generalist if like it's a little tighter, because sometimes you can't, you need to pivot between the illustration part and the animation.
But that goes both ways, right? Because there are some folks that have the highest day rates because they have experience.
That's true.
In so much. And so
they can do anything.
Yeah, it's I guess maybe not as cut and dry, because there are also people that we bring on because we've worked with them for so long and we trust them to such a large extent that we know they can handle many different styles or techniques, and more than anything can trust that they're gonna apply themselves and be fun and easy to work with, and
help guide us too. I love when our team is like saying, hey, I know you're managing this particular timeline, but I would propose that you know are aware of this, and that is so valuable in a teammate. So
I love that, the idea that, like, you know, if you're hiring someone, it's not just that you're hiring them to do a job, you know, both parties can learn from each other. And I think that just goes back to the really collaborative nature. It looks like we do have a question from the audience. So I'm going to bring up Patrick. Patrick, can you hear us?
Yeah.
Welcome. Yep. Okay. Yep, we can.
Cool. Yeah, I saw that, like, you guys have obviously been around for quite a while. Like, I think 10 years in motion design terms is like eternity. I've only been doing it for a few years, so like, and I think, you know, the majority of people are the same. So is there something you can shed light on, like, you know, might be relevant, or something that like we should think about for like our careers as we go on? Because you know, it's such a like new industry and stuff, like you're kind of like leading the way in that.
Yeah, like where is it going to go in 5 years? Like, look at, if we can look at our career.
Like,
okay.
Or like, how do you treat what you're doing now as opposed to like 10 years ago? Like, is your attitudes changed and stuff like that?
Yeah, that's a good question.
That's a really good question. Yeah, I think it changes depending on the person, of course. On one hand, I think there is this natural, though it shouldn't necessarily be, you know, because people shouldn't be forced into this, but there's this natural, oh, I'm a designer or animator, and then I'm like a creative director, and then I'm a studio owner, and, you know, that kind of progression. I think it's, from our standpoint, probably in the future, easier to think of ourselves like motion design elderly that own a studio and then are basically funding the ability for people to work together, while we're more like executive producer types, you know. But then on the flip side, I do think there is a future for, you know, older individuals to continue doing their art, you know. Like, I think that we can look at almost any type of art to see that, you know, there's, you know, like my mom, who is a painter, still paints, you know, and I think that the only challenge there is that in technology, things change pretty darn quickly. And so the balance on that side will always be having to either continually adapt, because even we have to do that, right? Like, oh, there's this new software and it's better, it's more efficient. And, you know, the company wants you to use that. Or there's this new style. But I do also think that there's a place for individuals to carve out a future for themselves because their art is their own, you know, or there is a specific style that they have or technique that they can do better than anybody, you know. But I think it's evolving in front of us, right? All of us. So I don't know that there's one answer.
Yeah. And Patrick, I don't know, I feel like maybe I'm changing. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but when we first started in 2010, there weren't really the small studios that were, there were a handful, but not as many where it was like, you have a base, but there's no office, and then you hire throughout the world or throughout the United States or wherever. And that was really kind of not very common when we transitioned, and we were very scared because we thought that, first of all, we're going out and we're so tiny, like nobody's going to trust us to do anything. And then, you know, we don't have this space we can invite clients into. Lo and behold, 10 years later, you have a pandemic and nobody's going into these spaces, right? So, you know, if we had invested hundreds of thousands of dollars into a swanky office in Chicago, it would have been a complete waste in the last 2 years and potentially onward. I don't know. So there are things that have changed. We couldn't have predicted them. There are things that I think I see happening. I think that the industry, I think that your generation, I don't know your age, but I'm just saying, I think that the generation of 20 to 40 is seeing that, like, they want a work-life balance. They also want to be protected and taken care of in a sense when they work. Like, you're providing a service, you should be compensated for that service well, you know, especially when it's art and it's subjective and very hard to please people. So I'm starting to see a shift from, like, maybe people aren't going to be, you know, freelancing as much. Maybe there's going to be more of that studio model, but you're working from your own studio, your own offices.
Like satellites everywhere.
Yeah.
Kind of the thing. Yeah.
But I don't know. I'm not sure.
Yeah, it brings up an interesting point. Oh, go ahead, Patrick.
Oh, no, I was just like a little follow-up. Do you like think about this stuff a lot, or do you like kind of just go with it and then like things naturally develop?
Yeah.
Because I feel like sometimes I'm like trying to guess what's coming next.
Yeah.
But you kind of can, but you also kind of can't. So you just like,
dude,
oh man,
I do this to myself all the time where I'm like, I'll even do it with scripts. I'll be like, I wish I could be myself in 2 weeks and know what the script should be so that I could come back and tell myself. But no, I absolutely hear you. I think it's very important to balance it. I think you should always be looking 5 years, 10 years out, even planning your like retirement. You should dream, but you have to also let things flow, because we just talked about this yesterday. What was it we were talking about even?
Well, I think the point is we do constantly talk and think about this. I mean, for me, the thing I would say is make sure you carve out space that is not designing, animating, like whether that is yoga, it's exercise, it's reading, it's nature, like whatever it is, because those are the spaces where those thoughts are going to have the freedom and the time to like evolve and to just, like we've changed and we'll continue to change. The industry is changing and will continue to change. So I think the goal should probably be less about having to know what's coming,
like predicting,
and it's more about how do I feel right now? What am I liking? Where, what am I seeing? And what do I want to try and do, And that's going to be different at 20, 30, 40, 50, and so on. And that's okay. And maybe it isn't, maybe there's, it continues, but that's the thing I would say, I guess.
And I was going to suggest there's Motion Hatch did a podcast, I think it was last week or the week before, about aging in animation and in terms of, what's happening or going to happen in the industry as the current generations start aging. One thing that, they were talking about and we started hitting on was that the industry has to shift with it, right? So like as people are growing up and want more security, you know, to your point, Clara, of like people want the flexibility, but the security. And so I do imagine that there's going to be more demand of either smaller studios or agencies that have kind of that flexibility and that work-life balance. So you get, you know, time with your family, but also you get the security of a job and benefits. So I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens, but I think that the people, the people in it are going to have to shift the industry as, you know, as we move forward.
One thing, and Maren, I'd be curious to hear if you all at Dash are seeing this too, but I feel like we've noticed over the last 2 years, maybe, like on the there's way more freelancers, but also the freelance market is it's getting more expensive, let's just say, like in terms of day rates or hourly rates and that kind of a thing. And so I think we're getting to a point where a lot of super talented freelancers have similar day rates to like a small studio. And I'm sort of interested to see what that evolves into in terms of like, now we're going to see so many small studios of like 1-2 people.
Yeah, I think that's totally doable. And that just creates a little like microorganism of great work that can be lifted by many small.
And I do think, because I see it even with us, because like we were 2 people and then we were 3 and now we're 5. Like I see even for us starting to get a pinch bigger because we can't afford to hire freelancers all the time anymore. We need to find the balance between making sure we create a safe space that, you know, people can feel comfortable doing great work, but be paid well and have benefits. You know, there's always this balancing act from that standpoint. So I'm curious if you've had that feeling yourself.
Oh, totally. I mean, we've talked a lot about how in the past, it's probably been longer than that, but like 5 years, right? That like the traditional large agency, you know, like advertising agency, you know, I think clients are realizing that at large agencies like that, you're buying into some of that bulk and that like overhead cost that requires an agency like that. At the same time, we're seeing on the other end of that, you know, to your point, Jonathan, freelancers coming out that do phenomenal work and that could essentially take on the type of work that, you know, that needs that the client is asking for. And then you have, you know, like small studios in the middle. And something that we're realizing is that clients don't have to go to those traditional large agencies. So they had to like smaller studios or freelancers. At the same time, that freelancer pool is like growing, right? And so it's kind of like shifting, like you're saying. So I mean, personally, I think being in a small studio or a freelancer is like the good place to be because of that right now. It sounds like you guys are experiencing the same.
Yeah, and the direct to client is so phenomenal. Like it really is a great place to be. And I think that the only roadblock for sometimes for the freelance market is all that liability insurance that like a bigger client wants you to carry. And I'm wondering if there's a way in the future freelancers could create a cooperative that, I don't know how, probably insurance agents would never do this, but some way to make it so you could all pay into an insurance, because it's really crappy, because like they make you carry crazy insurance and it's prohibitive. Like it really makes it hard, so that like this super talented freelancer who can do this entire video for this company can't get the job because they don't have a certificate of insurance, you know, and it's BS. And it's the same thing with healthcare insurance. All these insurance companies, it's just a mess. So.
But I will say on the flip side, those companies that require those insurances are bulkier themselves. And so to think of like one person or 2 people doing some of those projects
it would be impossible.
is
You're right.
insane. So I do think, like Maren, to your point, like those, you know, you were sort of saying it's good to be a small studio. I do think there's still always going to be a place and a space for everybody. And that's why I feel like our community is so collaborative, because it's like, you know, it's the idea of, you know, the tide lifts all, you know, boats or whatever, you know. So we're still in that area, I think, of the time of our industry where, hey, there's space for everybody.
Yeah, totally. We were sort of talking about this, and, you know, you were hitting on it a little bit earlier, but how did y'all see the last year in terms of work because of the pandemic? And, to your point, and something that we noticed was, you didn't have to be in New York or LA for clients to like realize that you exist and want to have meetings with them. We're all probably sick of Zoom meetings, but it's certainly opened up a lot more work to smaller markets. Have y'all experienced that as well?
Well, I would say to that specific point, there's been no difference for us because like
our model was built
that
on
was
that.
literally
That was how you always did it. Yeah.
Yeah. So that hasn't changed. But I would agree that that's definitely happening. And I mean, Jaguar Land Rover was not where we were, and WebMD is in Georgia and we're not there, and Google's in California, you know what I mean? So a lot of our clients aren't, 75% of our workload is outside of West Virginia, and we're in West Virginia. So,
but I do think that the good last year and the year before were harder.
For sure.
And we survived it, and we're going to be fine. But I definitely saw like, it was like, everybody talks about that feast or famine. And that's kind of the nature of this kind of industry when you have to create a video that's a minute long and it takes 8 weeks to finish. Like it's like, it takes a lot of focus. And then, sometimes you can't say yes to everything. So I do find that we had a lot of asks, and then a lot would fail because the pandemic was making a lot of our clients very nervous, and they were, I think, really looking at bigger things than we even understand, like Wall Street, or I don't know what they were looking at, but also all their events are canceled. And, all of this is impacting a lot of our industry. But at the same time, we saw that then now everybody wants an online presence, and everybody sees the value of video. So it was a balancing act. It ended up being fine, but I do think we were slower than we were in 2019.
Oh, we definitely were. And I will say, I think a lot, what we were hearing in the industry from like friends and other studios was like, oh man, we're busier than ever. It's amazing. We didn't have that experience ourselves at first. Like we had a retainer get canceled. We had a whole bunch of like long-term and big projects go away. And some of those ended up coming back over time. But there was a good 4 to 7 month period where we were having hard conversations with our employees and thinking about what to do. But I will say, being a small studio, again, like it afforded us the ability to lean into what was going on. And so like Clara and I were able to homeschool our kids, and like Ryan, our design director, has a fan, so there were things we could do.
When y'all come out and see our pandemic garden, we'll show you where we put our time.
Yeah, right.
That's amazing.
But anyway, so I will say, just to put that out there, that if there were people that struggled, like we struggled too, but it worked out just fine.
So far.
Yeah.
We'll see coming 2022.
Yeah, don't put that out there in the world. It looks like we have, Jen. Hey, how are you?
I'm good. Hi guys.
Hello.
Nice to meet you. I just have a question regarding to previous conversation. You guys said having direct clients was one of it that got you guys, why you guys decide to move forward. What have you guys done differently from before until you guys get more direct clients? Because that's one of my current challenge.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a good question. I wish I could say that we were so intentional with our plans that we got a ton of direct to client work because we went after it. We did to some degree, but I think going back early in the conversation, a lot of the direct to client work we got at first was because we had direct relationships with people who ended up working there. When we started Coat of Arms, it was sort of this like answer to the agency model. Like Claire and I both worked at agencies, both as freelancers and full-timers. And we just felt like it was this cumbersome, it just didn't fit with how we wanted to work. And so we kind of purposely were doing work for directors and producers and small companies that ended up being more direct to client, where we kind of like, avoided some of the bigger agency oriented projects because we had already been doing that full time or as
I think
freelancers.
also, Jen, if like you're starting to design what your studio is like, sit down and figure out a story. I know that sounds crazy, but like, write down what clients you want, and then think about what they want to hear from you. Like, create a story of your company. And then even if you are on your way to becoming more what that is, start rehearsing it so that you can like express that to a client, because the confidence that you are going to exhibit with a colleague or whatever will land you in those doors. I really believe that.
That's a good,
And
yeah.
starting to like envision yourself working with those clients, and you'll get there. Like, it's very strange, but I do believe that Jonathan and I have always tried to do this, where it's like, we will envision like, oh, I really wish we could be like this studio. And then we'll start thinking about like, well, what do they do? Or how can we present ourselves in a way that's not going to break the bank, that makes us feel like we are confident and can do this. And it's not the fake it till you make it, because I don't like that statement, but it is a proceed with confidence and intention, and really set yourself apart so that then a colleague will bring you in.
This made me think really quickly. So we're doing another documentary film, and one of the people that we're following in the film is a textile artist, and she studied in Japan, this amazing textile artist there. And one of the biggest takeaways she took from this mentor of hers was that never half it, like sort of like half do something in practice, always go 100%. So like, if you're going to practice, do it as if it's real. So like,
well, if you're going to hem a shirt, do it really well.
Right. And that's how you get good at the hemming. And it's the same thing with anything you do, design, animation, producing, your brand of whatever it is, do it as if this is for the meeting that you want to have,
Right.
or this is for a video that will be delivered to Coca-Cola, but it's just you doing it on the side.
Yeah.
I think that could be a good bit of, thing to
helpful.
think about.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Another follow-up question, sort of related, because you guys were talking about basically presenting works that you want to get more out.
Mhm.
And one thing that I've heard is I tend to present a type of work that I like to work on more, but some of the feedback that I heard is have more variety in your work. And I was just wondering, what are your takes on that?
That's tough.
I love when, if you're an individual freelance artist or hired at a studio and you have a style, I love that. I think it's so cool when you are the only person on this planet that creates that kind of art. And I think that's super cool. And having that voice is spectacular. And sometimes those voices get really popular and everybody starts mimicking you, and how complimentary, right? But I do think if you want a studio where you are trying to appease more clients directly and get direct, you have to bring in colleagues and build out a portfolio that has diversity.
I don't know. I personally feel like there's space for both extremes,
sure.
because I know artists that are both extremes, I remember working with one artist in Pennsylvania who has a very specific style and only does that style. And he has been busy working in that style his entire career.
Mm-hmm.
But then I know people that are more this is almost like that generalist versus specialist conversation. And I will say this, like, you should be yourself and ultimately find comfort and confidence in your own skin as an artist and person.
Yeah.
And so nobody can tell you what you should or shouldn't be doing, only you can. And I know that it's almost counterintuitive sometimes as like a student or an artist that's still growing, but dabble, explore, but you will, I think, find the things that you are very good at or you love to do. And I would lean into that. And if certain spaces don't accept of that, find the spaces that do,
Yeah, somebody out there wants your video.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Awesome. That's great advice. Well, we are at time, a few minutes over. We could keep this conversation going for another hour, I think. But Jonathan, Clara, thank y'all so much. I have appreciated all of your insights, and I have done a quick Google Maps search, and it's like 6 hours to Helvetia. So I am humbly going to show up at your door one day. I'll give you a heads up. But
Please do. Yeah,
well,
it was such a
truly,
pleasure.
Yeah, we would love visitors, especially talented folks like all of you. Helvetia is a little special town in that it's like pretty far out. So don't use your GPS. You have to look at an old traditional map.
Oh, that's good to know.
Yeah. And
yeah, many people get lost on like old dirt roads that like have creek crossings and that kind of thing.
But anyway, we would love to see you, and Godspeed.
Awesome. Well, thank y'all so much. And everyone, I hope y'all have a wonderful weekend, and we will be back next week.
Awesome.
All right.
Take care, everyone.
Thanks. Bye, y'all.
Bye.
Bye.
Hey y'all, thanks again for joining us for Mograph Lunch. As a reminder, this is just the first part of a longer conversation that happens every Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time on Clubhouse. We'll continue the NPG conversation as we talk about news, projects, and general industry advice. And then we'll open up the door on Clubhouse to answer questions live, interact with some of your peers, and get to know some of the folks in the industry. Follow the link below for more information, and we will see you next week.